Do you think you know Africa? A continent of safaris, of poverty, of conflict. That is the version you have been given. But what if one of the oldest civilizations on Earth has been hiding in plain sight? What if the story of humanity did not begin in the places you were taught to admire, but in a land of volcanic highlands, stone churches, forgotten kingdoms, and people who have measured time differently for thousands of years? Imagine a country that was building monuments while much of Europe was still covered in forests. A country that preserved its identity while empires rose and collapsed around it. A country whose history stretches so deep into the past that some scientists believe humanity itself began here. Forget everything you think you know about Ethiopia. Because Ethiopia is not simply a country. It is a surviving fragment of an older world. The Ethiopian Highlands rise from East Africa like a continent within a continent. At elevations exceeding 10,000 feet, clouds drift beneath mountain ridges. The air is thinner here, cooler, sharper, and for thousands of years these mountains have done something remarkable. They have protected an entire civilization. Long before borders were drawn, before modern nations existed, these highlands created a natural fortress. Invading armies struggled to reach them. Empires found them difficult to control, and cultures that vanished elsewhere survived here. Not unchanged, but unbroken. The city of Addis Ababa spreads across these elevations at nearly 8,000 feet above sea level, a capital city higher than most mountains. Modern traffic moves beneath eucalyptus trees introduced more than a century ago. Glass towers rise beside crowded markets, and beneath the noise of 21st century life exists a deeper reality. Because Ethiopia's capital is one of the youngest parts of the country, its true story begins much further back, far beyond memory. In the Afar Depression, the landscape appears less like Earth and more like an unfinished planet. The ground fractures. Steam escapes from beneath the crust. Mineral deposits paint the surface in yellow, green, and orange. Temperatures regularly exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Few places on Earth appear more hostile to life. Yet it was here that scientists uncovered one of the most important discoveries in human history. A skeleton. Small, fragile, more than 3 million years old. The world knows her as Lucy. She stood barely 3.5 feet tall. Her brain was small, her body primitive, yet she walked upright. And through her remains, humanity caught a glimpse of its own beginning. Not a king, not a conqueror, not a monument, a distant ancestor. A reminder that before civilizations, before languages, before nations, there was simply a human being taking her first steps across African soil. North of the highlands lies Axum. Today, it is a quiet city. But 15 centuries ago it stood at the center of one of the most powerful empires on Earth. Ancient merchants crossed deserts and oceans to reach it. Gold arrived from the south, ivory from the interior, spices from distant lands. And ships connected Axum to India, Arabia, and the Mediterranean. At its height, the Kingdom of Axum was considered one of the great powers of the ancient world, equal to Rome, Persia, and China. Yet outside Africa, few people remember its name. The giant stone obelisks still rise above the landscape. Some weigh hundreds of tons, carved from single pieces of granite, transported without modern machinery, raised without modern engineering. Their existence poses a question that history has still not completely answered. How much have we forgotten? But Ethiopia's greatest mystery lies further south, in the town of Lalibela. At first glance, nothing seems unusual. The hills are quiet, the landscape modest. There are no towering cathedrals visible from a distance, no skyline announcing greatness, because the churches are not built above the ground. They were carved into it. Imagine standing on solid rock and discovering that an entire church exists beneath your feet, not constructed stone by stone, but excavated from a single block of volcanic rock, removed piece by piece, year after year, generation after generation, until architecture emerged from absence. 11 churches, entirely carved downward, connected through tunnels and passageways. A sacred city hidden within the earth itself. Local tradition says angels helped build them. Engineers suggest decades of labor. Historians debate the details. But everyone agrees on one thing. Nothing else on earth looks quite like Lalibela. Pilgrims dressed in white continue arriving here every year. Many travel for days on foot. some for weeks, not because the churches are ancient, but because for them, they are alive. Faith preserved not inside museums, but inside daily life. The Blue Nile begins its journey in Ethiopia, before it reaches Sudan, before it reaches Egypt, before it becomes one of the world's most famous rivers. It begins here, in the Ethiopian Highlands. The river descends through immense canyons, often compared to the Grand Canyon, except these valleys remain largely unknown to the outside world. Their cliffs fall thousands of feet, mist rises from waterfalls, and villages cling to slopes that appear impossible to inhabit. For centuries, these landscapes shaped the rhythm of Ethiopian life. Isolation created diversity. Communities developed independently. Languages evolved. Traditions endured. What appears from above as a single country is in reality a mosaic of worlds. More than 80 languages are spoken across Ethiopia today. Dozens of cultures. Multiple religions. Different histories. Different identities. Yet somehow they remain connected by something deeper than uniformity. A shared endurance. In the Simien Mountains, cliffs drop dramatically into the clouds. Gelada monkeys gather in vast numbers across alpine meadows. The landscape feels prehistoric, as though time moves differently here. And perhaps it does, because Ethiopia follows its own calendar, its own clock, even its own understanding of time itself. While much of the world rushes forward, Ethiopia quietly preserves older rhythms, not because it rejects modernity, but because continuity matters here. History is not something left behind. It remains present, visible, alive. Yet Ethiopia faces challenges no less significant than its achievements. Population growth, environmental pressure, urban expansion, political tensions. The same forces reshaping societies across the globe. No civilization survives simply by remembering its past. It survives by adapting. And adaptation has always been Ethiopia's greatest talent. For thousands of years, this land has faced drought, conflict, isolation, and change, again and again. Yet each generation found a way forward, not through domination, not through certainty, but through persistence. Perhaps that is Ethiopia's greatest lesson. Civilizations do not endure because they are powerful. Power fades. Empires collapse. Monuments crumble. Civilizations endure because they develop the ability to survive uncertainty. From the first footsteps of humanity in the Afar Desert, to the stone churches of Lalibela, to the mountains that protected kingdoms for centuries, Ethiopia tells the same story over and over again. Not a story of conquest, a story of continuity. The world often celebrates what is new, what is fast, what is visible. Ethiopia reminds us of something older, something quieter, that endurance itself can be a form of greatness. Because before history was written, before nations were imagined, before the modern world existed, there were people here, living, building, believing, and continuing. Ethiopia is not a forgotten civilization. It is